very good evening. Welcome to the show. The way it's turned out, and we have to make things up as we go along on this show, it's turned out as a football special, which I suppose is appropriate with the World Cup kicking off, and also appropriate with the talk earlier this week, or was it a week ago, of football introducing, or at least the Premier League introducing, a midwinter break. I think it's a fair idea for a midsummer break as far as this show is concerned. So make the most of tonight, because for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have a little bit of a rest. It's never the easiest thing to entice guests in here, particularly with World Cup football on television, as I found out today. That wasn't strictly the reason that you lumbered with Dom Howson of the Sheffield Star. Good evening, Dom. Thanks so much for coming in. And by the way, Gration and Damian Johnson are in part one, because the three of us were among, what, 1,000 people, perhaps a bit more than that, with those outside at the funeral today of Sheffield's legendary boxing trainer, Brendan Ingle, and we'll hear an interview that I recorded with Gration and with Damian Johnson a little bit later. Dom, it's good to see you again. I rested you for the show. I worked out in appearances, you got the highest number of guest appearances on this show.
Oh, I'm honoured. I think this is the first time I've ever actually had the red sofa all to myself.
I think it is. I think it is.
I'm privileged.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you see it like that. At least one person's privilege. But it is high time, because we've had a series of Blades guests. Carla Ward was here last week, and we haven't really looked in any detail at Sheffield Wednesday, the way the summer's going. Now, I know some people will say, well, there's nothing to talk about, but there's always speculation, and there's always like instinct that applies. Where are Sheffield Star writer, by the way, if anybody hasn't come across Dom Howson, where are Sheffield Wednesday at this summer as we speak?
I think we're both of the opinion that we're not expecting too much business in terms of transfers coming in. I think there's going to be more activity going out, and you know, as I wrote today, there's interest in Barry Bannon and Fernando Forestieri. You know, Stoke are looking at him, and I'm sure they probably won't be the only ones. And you've then got Barry Bannon, who is interested in Middlesbrough and Birmingham City. So, you know, championship rivals, and you know, 2 of Wednesday's top performers. And you know, as we've written about in the last few months, the consequence of Wednesday not getting promotion last season, underachieving, disappointing campaign and finishing 15th, is that they have spent heavily in the 3 years that Dejphon Chansiri has been at the helm, and they've now got to seriously consider cutting their cloth. We've all seen what's happened with Aston Villa. Now, Sheffield Wednesday are nowhere near in that sort of precarious financial position, but there's been plenty of trading in, but not enough going out over the last few years. What we're seeing is a pretty bloated Wednesday squad, which has now had that influx of young, talented, exciting, hungry academy players. But I think there's going to have to be some wheeling and dealing, and so it will be interesting if Wednesday, as would appear the case, that there's bound to be a moment this summer in the next 2 months where you've got to think there's going to be some big offers coming in for the star players of a Kieran Westwood or Fernando Forestieri, Barry Bannon, and then the Wednesday's hierarchy are going to have to seriously look at that and think, if we were to let someone go, it would then maybe potentially give us that room to manoeuvre in the transfer market, which right now I would suggest that they haven't got. We know that defensively the #1 transfer target is bringing back Federico Venancio. But again, you know, £800,000, you know, that's what my sources have told me, is you know, how much Vittorio Setúbal are looking for him. There's negotiations are ongoing. You know, ideally, Jos Lukai wants to get him back. He did well in the second half of the season, but it again comes down to negotiating at the right price.
Even 800,000 is not easy. But it depends. I think we're both of the view that this churn that the squad has needed for some time should have taken place last summer. You know, it was crying out for it then. It's ironic to me that we're now in a position where the feeling, my view is, look, if somehow you can hold on to your best players, you don't need an awful lot to add to it to take Wednesday into a sort of a challenging position. So it really depends how you couch it. I think the first story that came out about Bannon and Forestieri this week was a national newspaper story suggesting that Wednesday were looking to cash in, but actively looking to offload these players. Do you think that's the case?
No.
I certainly don't.
No, I don't think that's the case. This is just me personally thinking out loud, and from what I've been told, believe that if a serious big offer came in for potentially one of the prized assets at the football club, and of course another name that we didn't mention before was Jordan Rhodes. Yeah. That's a huge one in terms of, you know, he's one of the highest earners, and they have a huge wage bill that has kept mounting and mounting. They have stockpiled players, and there does eventually come a point where that has to stop. Yeah,
I think in an ideal world, I wrote a column about Jordan Rhodes and things like that this week. In an ideal world, you would look and say, which are the players that we can afford to lose? Which are the players that would ease? And certainly Jordan Rhodes is one of those. Kieran Westwood, with no disrespect to his superb goalkeeping talents, is another, only on the basis that he would command a fee, and there are two very good young goalkeepers. So if they got away with, for instance, those two going, would there be enough in the pot then, do you think, to bring in a couple of influential loan players? I
still believe that there will be a few additions made this summer, regardless of who leaves the football club, and I do think there's the flexibility there for that to happen. But at the end of last season, Jos Luhukay was very clear in what he said, that they're going to have to be creative in the transfer market. So that, to me, instantly suggests that they will be looking very much so at the loan market, season-long loans.
Loan swaps, maybe?
You know, I wrote last month, and I stick by it, I think ideally they need 4 new faces. Centre-half, a left wing back, another central midfielder, and a winger, again, someone who is adaptable, who can play right or left, but crucially has pace, which is what this team lacks right now.
Yeah, I've been linked with a couple of foreign players, one a striker and one a wing. I wouldn't have thought personally you need to add to the strike department. That wouldn't be so critical.
No, I'm with you on that. I think somebody who, again, we've seen that Luhukay likes to change formations, and I think that he wants to spring a surprise or two on the opposition, and we've seen him play 4-3-3, 3-5-2, variations of 3-4-3, and so that's where I think he'd want somebody else who can play in that wide role, who he trusts and believes, again, can make a big difference and an impact on this team.
Okay, we're talking a bit about the World Cup, having seen the opening tremendous victory for the host Russia, 5-0 against a desperately disappointed Saudi Arabia. We'll comment on that a bit later. But the kind of size of offers that, you know, there's no way in the world that anybody, in my view, at Hillsborough is thinking, well, let's hope we get a big bid for Bannon, let's hope we get a big bid for Forestieri. Particularly Forestieri, who I've turned tail on this one, because there was a time when I thought Wednesday missed the boat with, say, a £13 million offer from Fulham, I think, was talked about. I thought it made some logical sense at that time, about a year ago. Now, having seen what he did at the end of last season, or Gary Megson described him to me as the best player in the Championship in his view. I can understand where he's coming from. On his day, on his form.
Yeah, on his day, I think over the course of the season, if you go back to the first year under Carlos Carvalho, you know, he finished top scorer with 15 goals, and then the second year, which is well documented, he still finished top scorer with 12. And so, and his record at Hillsborough particularly is phenomenal. He's got a great strike ratio, you know, and we saw, like you said, at the end of last season, that he's a match winner. He can do things that other players can't, and he can unlock the door. And so, for me, I'm with you. Unless they got you know, an offer that was too good to turn down.
What is too good to turn down?
Well, I think you're talking 15 million plus. I think, and who realistically in the Championship is going to be in a position to to put, you know, that on the table?
Could. I'm sure Stoke could.
Well, but then Stoke, Benicophobe, they've spent big on him, you know, loan, and then they're going to turn it into a permanent in January. They also signed another player, so I know they've got the parachute payments, but yeah, Swansea, you're right. I mean, you'd think Swansea and West Brom. Again, if West Brom sell a couple of players, and I know that a few are interesting, Burnley right now, again, might give them... But it doesn't send out the right message if you are selling Forestieri to a potential rival. You know, if Wednesday is serious about going for the top 6 next season, and I believe this squad, if they keep them fit, are capable of doing it, then they need to hang on to Forestieri.
Yeah, me too. And I think if they do hang on to these players and add strategically a loan or two, I think they could well do well. That's my... Well, we'll talk a bit more about the kind of offers they might receive and what it would take to make Wednesday consider a bit later. And plenty of football chat to come with James Gregg and other sports as well. We'll talk about the World Cup. We'll talk about Sheffield United. It's a fairly quiet summer for them so far as well. But just some reflections now on earlier today in Sheffield city centre. I couldn't get in, actually, among hundreds who couldn't get in. I turned up, what, 40 minutes or so before the scheduled start of Brendan Ingle's funeral service at Sheffield Cathedral, and it was already packed to the rafters, and we stood outside in the sunshine, hundreds of us, watching the big screen, a very beautiful and moving service for a wonderful human being, not just a boxing trainer. You know, his ability, his qualities as a person transcended that. Everybody has respect for Brendan Ingle, including 2 esteemed colleagues who I spoke to as we were attending the service, as it were, on the steps of the cathedral today, while hymns were in progress. I spoke to Harry Gration and to Damian Johnson. Harry Gration, Damian Johnson, among hundreds outside the Sheffield Cathedral. The great and the good can't get inside?
Well, to be honest, I would have queued halfway down the street to be here today because, you know, you can feel the atmosphere, can't you, Damien? There's a genuine affection, a real love. You don't get that very often, and it's all for Brendan.
Indeed. I think we'd all be prepared to stand a long time for Brendan.
Absolutely, yeah. He had that magical way about him. He could get you to do anything, couldn't he? I mean, he used to get me to interview boxers who we'd not even come to the gym to interview, just to give them a bit of a flavour of what the media is like, and if they became famous, they'd have a bit of a handle on how to be interviewed. Yeah,
he did that once with me. He asked me to interview an 11-year-old Naz Hamid, and he was chilling. At 11, he said he's going to be world champion. Yeah. It's a fact.
I did this thing many years ago, back in 1980 whatever, and he said to me, right, there's a young lad here called Harold Bomber Graham. He said, get in the ring and try and hit him. And Harold had his hands behind his back. Yeah. And I tried for 3 minutes and I was exhausted. I never even got within a yard of him. It was unbelievable. But that was the kind of person he was. He used boxing for a particular reason, and he used it to give discipline to those who'd gone off the straight and narrow. Let's not underestimate what he did for so many people. How many of us can turn around and say, we've changed lives? He changed hundreds of lives. That's his real legacy. Wonderful guy.
Yeah, his greatness transcended his sport, didn't it, Damien?
Yeah, it did. And on that same subject, I remember going to do a feature. I think he'd got the OBE or some kind of award, and we did a feature behind the scenes. He was taking one of his boxers to fight on the undercard. It was Richie Woodall in Telford. And this guy was just a journeyman boxer, and he was earning about £600, and he got battered. And I said, you know, it's a bit of a hard night for your boy tonight, Brendan. He said, no. He said, he's got £600. This lad will have his mortgage paid off in a few months. He was just a bricklayer from Grimsby. And he used boxing to get what he could from it, and he improved his life, and Brendan was the directing force in all of that.
Yeah. Great thing was, as I remember Brendan with a smile, but also treating the likes of us as members of the family when we called up at Newman Road, Winkerbank.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I first came into contact when I started on Look North back in 1982, and I had a very strong association with him for many years. Mainly initially through Harold Bomber Graham, who was one of his sort of first really big stars. But you look at the people who are here today, they are mega stars, but not just the ones he trained. You've got international boxers who wanted to pay their respects to him, even if they've never actually met the guy or been associated with him. And to hear these beautiful songs now from Sheffield Cathedral, to see 400 people, you know, make their way across, it brought a tear to my eye, I can tell you.
Favourite story?
Well, you mentioned Nazim Hamid, and I remember him coming up to Look North with Bomber Graham and Brendan to be interviewed. I think Bomber was bringing in one of the belts. He'd won the European Championship or something. And I remember that actually Naz was very quiet. He turned up in a blazer, suit and tie, suited and booted, and I got the sense he was slightly overawed about being on television. And that always stuck with me, because that wasn't the Naz we came to know a bit later in life, was it? He was a very brash character.
It wasn't. You've got a story. I think we'll just about get away with it.
Yeah, we'll get away with this because it's true. Apparently, he got all the boxers. You know what it was like, and he got them all lined up and said, "Right." I can't do the Irish accent. Forgive me, Alan. Said, "Who's pinched the toilet roll?" And all of them were looking at that. He said, "Right, here's a challenge for you." They got 2 pieces of paper. Can you wipe your backside with 2 pieces of paper? And it was just so typical of Brendan, wasn't it? A super guy. He'd be sorely, sorely missed, because Sheffield's lost one of its own sons.
Wonderful. And we say farewell to him as something very exciting, which he would have enjoyed, the World Cup, because he wasn't really a football man. He embraced life, didn't he?
Of course he did.
And you've embraced life with a prediction.
Oh, I have, yeah. And everyone's been taking the mickey out of me. I don't go to the bookies ever, but I went the other day and I put £20 on England to win the World Cup. I got 16 to 1 Damian, which is a reasonable set of odds. So I will stand to win nearly £400. More probably lose £20 though.
But Harry, tell them who you got in the office sweepstake.
Iceland.
Good luck with that.
You.
Thank you.
They made mincemeat of England not so long ago as well. So, who do I think? I don't know. I'm with you, Harry.
No, I don't.
I'm with you. Now that you've had a bet on it, I won't get 16 to 1.
Exactly. You won't. You won't. It's gone down enormously.
Thanks, chaps.
Pleasure.
And
Pleasure.
to Brendan Ingle, a very fond farewell.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great stories, great memories, and thanks there to Damian and to Harry at Sheffield Cathedral earlier today. You won't remember Brendan right at the start. You'll just know of the legend that he is and was, but I still think is.
I interviewed him, I think, maybe 6-7 years ago, and yeah, what a character, and just everything he's done for the city and for the gym, and for the amount of world champions that has been produced in this city, and that's a lot down to his hard work and endeavour.
Absolutely. There's not a lot more we can say about him because it's all been said, but it's great to see so many people pay respect to him. What about Harry Gration's World Cup tip then? He's going boldly for England, 16 to 1 he says he got. Is he being foolish or is he being inspired?
I think that England should get out of the group, and I can see them winning a knockout match, which they haven't done for quite a few tournaments now. But I think the trouble will be that in the quarterfinals they're due to face either Brazil or Germany, depending on where they finish in the group and who they end up playing then in that last 16. So I personally think it would be a good achievement for England if they got to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I feel that they will do.
It'd be progress.
Yeah. But I think that the one thing we get wrong here is that we make a fresh start and then scrap it and start all over again. I think the FA would do well to make it clear that come what may, they've started on a course with this manager and this approach, and regardless of what happens in Russia, he's our man.
I think that, I mean, Gareth Southgate, for me, has done a superb job since going in there, and picked up results, but of course he's going to be judged now at the World Cup, and I think the way that he's handled the media and he's embraced that, it's sort of American football really, what they were doing last week, and I thought that was great, not just because I work in that that profession, as do you, but I just think that he's sort of trying to tap into something and get that enthusiasm behind the national team, and I think there was a period where fans were turned off by England when it would come to friendlies or matches, and maybe there wasn't that sort of that love affair wasn't there, whereas now I think they were creating that, and so hopefully they're going to put in some strong performances. Yeah,
I think Gareth Southgate's got about it in a far better manner than I expected he would at the start. I'm hoping we're all going to be proved wrong. 5 minutes time, take a break. James Gregg will be here. We'll talk about Sheffield United as well. Do rejoin us.